Hola Adrián, ¿cómo estás? Mariana, ¿cómo están? ¿Me pudieran decir si se escucha bien, please? Ya llegó el doctor Mike, déjenme... Oh, ahí está. Sí, Marcos, sí va a quedar grabado. Doctor Mike, how are you
Yo,
doing?
good. How are you?
Fine, fine, fine. First of all, let me thank you. I'm really, really excited to talk to you today. It's a huge honor, man. I can barely believe it. So, thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much. Muchas gracias.
Is it okay if I first introduce you in Spanish and then we go on in English?
Of course, todo bien.
Yeah, very well. Pues hola a todos, estamos en vivo así con el doctor Mike Israetel. Mike Israetel, pues bueno, para la mayoría de nosotros no necesita introducción. Si alguien ha escuchado de mínimo volumen efectivo, máximo volumen recuperable, pues bueno, aquí tenemos al culpable. Y el día de hoy vamos a estar hablando del diseño y un poquito de progresión, si nos da tiempo, de un mesociclo de entrenamiento para la hipertrofia. Vamos a estar hablando de las variables, de cómo las integra el doctor Mike, y pues bueno, ya sobre eso. So very well, Mike. Again, I'm really excited to talk to you today. And the topic first, it was going to be about motivation, but then I kind of realized, well, I'm going to talk to Mike Israetel. Why am I not talking about hypertrophy?
Shit.
So there you go. So, Mike, I have a series of topics that I would really like to hear you talking about. First off, in regards to hypertrophy, I would like to start really at the beginning of it. And of course, really short versions of all this information. First off, how do muscles grow? What do we know now that we didn't know or we are starting to understand a little differently? In regards to tension, active tension, passive tension, cell swelling, and metabolites. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so muscles grow by receiving a stimulus in many forms, but the primary one is training of some kind. And then they don't grow while you're at the gym. The stimulus goes through a couple of signaling cascades, and then it takes a while to actually turn all those cellular pathways on. And through proper rest and proper nutrition, muscle is grown. As far as what those stimuli are, tension seems to be very important, specifically active tension, the actual muscle itself, generating the tension. Passive tension can turn into active tension, so is probably also somewhat effective for muscle growth, but really, ideally, you want the muscle to be generating the force, and that's the best way to enhance growth. Metabolites, there have been multiple recent studies that show that metabolites, such as lactic acid, do have pretty well demonstrated hypertrophy signaling mechanisms. So it turns out that metabolites probably also cause growth. Cell swelling has been pretty well established for a long time to cause hypertrophy. I'm not exactly sure on the time course and the exact magnitude of hypertrophy that is caused through cell swelling, but we can't rule it out as a completely unimportant factor. So I think the best kind of training combines a high degree of tension produced by the muscle itself. In addition to that, it combines fatiguing protocols that generate plenty of metabolites in the muscle itself. And as well, cell swelling is a factor. So the bigger the pump you can get from training, all other things being equal, the better. So I think if you're getting really good tension through the muscle, if you are
Right.
doing plenty of mechanical work, if you're sequestering lots of metabolites, and if you've got a big pump, it's unlikely that you are not producing a good stimulus through the training aspect, and then everything else comes down to nutrition, recovery, genetics, so on and so forth. So, for example, if you do multiple sets of squats, when you feel the tension in your quadriceps being generated massively, especially at the bottom where the stretch under tension, which is an independent mechanism of hypertrophy, is really pronounced. If you feel that, if towards the end of each set you get a very, very powerful burn in your quads, it takes a few, a minute or so to leave completely between sets. And if after multiple sets you have a huge pump and you can barely bend your legs, you may have many problems, but stimulating hypertrophy is probably not one of your problems.
You got 99 problems, but hypertrophy is not one of them.
No, well, maybe it's still one, but stimulating it isn't one. maybe realizing it through poor nutrition or something like that.
Sure.
If you don't sleep after that workout, maybe you get zero growth. So.
Well, you can always win. But could you say, Dr. Mike, that would you be confident enough to say that it's not just about tension, about motor unit recruitment? Let's say we work with a high rep set. Is it not just again tension as it would be with a low rep set, or how do these metabolites actually contribute to the hypertrophy stimuli?
Well, there's a couple of studies on animals, and I think a few in humans, where they actually trace the mechanisms by which metabolites signal direct hypertrophy to occur. And this has been established for cell swelling too. So you can say it's only tension if you'd like, but then you have to explain why these other mechanisms exist. I make an analogy here. Can you get full and a good satisfying meal by eating only dinner foods and not dessert foods? Yeah. You can also get pretty much all of your hypertrophy stimulus from tension. But then to get the optimal fullness and the optimal meal experience, maybe you need mostly dinner foods and a little bit of dessert at the end. So maybe
Right.
tension is primary, but metabolites and cell swelling also contribute to hypertrophy. And we don't want to oversimplify beyond, what is it, quote attributed to Albert Einstein, which is probably dubious, but, make things as simple as you can, but never simpler than that. So I think a
Sure,
lot of
sure, sure.
people are very desperately trying to say it's only tension and not metabolites and not cell swelling. Well, there's direct mechanistic and molecular evidence for metabolites and cell swelling causing hypertrophy. You can't just pretend it's not there. And in addition to that, most of the very effective training protocols, multiple sets of moderate repetitions taken closer to failure, they generate not only lots of tension, but also plenty of metabolites and cell swelling. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to train in some weird way to get cell swelling or metabolites. You just train in the normal way and you get a large measure of all three. And I would say any way of training that distinctly tries to obviate one or two of those, for example, if you say you're really trying to generate metabolites without generating a lot of tension, I think is kind of nearly pointless,
Right.
because why would you take away something super effective to replace it with something not so effective? It's like going on a long flight, 18-hour flight where they serve like 3 or 4 meals and like trying to only eat snacks and peanuts. Like you can do it. I don't know why. I mean, they give you free food anyway. So maybe just take all the food and the snacks, right? So that's,
Right, right.
yeah.
And I think that's what happens oftentimes with hypertrophy. You can get there by so many pathways that maybe you end up not knowing how you got there.
Sure. Sure. What's important, though, is to know that if you want maximum hypertrophy, you had better know all the pathways because you want to exploit them all. And all of this is fun in theory until you really care about hypertrophy or until you want
Right.
to step on stage. When you want to step on a bodybuilding stage and you want to be bigger and leaner than everybody. And if you're telling yourself, oh, it's all tension, I'm just going to be doing sets of 5. And then you see a guy bigger than you and you're like, what kind of training do you do? He's like, yeah, I do lots of sets of 5, but also sets of 15 and sets of 32. You're going to be like, God damn it. Why am I not doing that? And you look at the theory and you're like, well, the theory actually makes sense. Why was I
Right.
trying to just, a lot of people have sort of an axe to grind. They want to say it's only tension. That's fine until it really matters. And then you want to exploit every possible thing that you can. It's a similar analogy. I've been watching a lot of World War II documentaries lately. It's like, imagine you have, 70% of your troops are mechanized. They're driving in tanks and vehicles. 30% are on horseback. So who are you going to send into battle? Well, sort of ideally, all of them.
Right.
Do you want to send the horseback troops? No, kind of sucks. But like, there's 30% more troops can probably make some kind of change. Like people on horseback still have guns; they're still mobile. So a lot of people are like, no, only tanks, only tension.
Right.
Why not the other stuff as well? If it makes a small difference, it can be additive, and it has been shown, at least in a few studies, to potentially be additive. That is, metabolites and cell swelling may work by mechanisms a little bit different. And so you can only get so much growth through tension. And if you add in metabolites and cell swelling, you get more growth you potentially could have not gotten at all. So there you go.
Very well. Did you watch the World War II in color documentary?
My
That was a great one,
man.
man.
So
That was
there's
a
two
great
of
one.
them. There's two. There's World War II in color and there's greatest events of World War II in color.
Oh, I watched the
Um,
first one, just the
yeah,
first
yeah, yeah,
one.
yeah. It's so good. I'm watching the first one now, but I've seen them both multiple times. Absolutely fascinating. I love it.
Yeah, I was in awe of all the information. And speaking of contest prep, I've seen your latest pictures, man. You look really freaky nowadays.
Thank you so
It's
much.
like it's like, God damn, Dr. Mike, what are you doing?
Just, I stopped training. I just do as many drugs as possible. Only drugs. No training, no diet either. I don't eat food. I just eat
Why?
drugs.
Yeah. Why even train? Why even eat? Use drugs. That's it.
That's it. Easy.
Very well. So now that we established just a basic establishment of the basic pathways for hypertrophy, what would you say are the big rocks that have to take place in our training? Obviously, we have to talk about volume, we have to talk about intensity, but what would you say are the key components for a hypertrophy program?
Mm-hmm. Component number one is exercise selection. I mean, fundamentally, very few people want to grow muscle. People want to grow specific muscle groups. If you want to improve the size of your chest, what you can do is pick exercises that properly stimulate your chest.
Right.
And the best way to do those is to pick exercises that are very disruptive, but also relatively safe and not so fatiguing. So exercises that have a pretty big range of motion, exercises which greatly rely on high force generation in the target muscle, exercises which are limited by the performance of the target muscle. So for example, if you do incline wide grip bench press for triceps, is it true that your triceps are active? Yeah, they help. But when you fail, and you can no longer do any more repetitions, what is it that failed? Well, sure as hell isn't your triceps. Your
Yeah, right.
triceps could have 10 more reps in them. So a lot of their motor units haven't even turned on maximally or just at the very end. And then your pecs get so weak that the triceps with no motor unit of activation can't even help the movement. So the movement is over. So if you really want, big triceps, you have to pick movements that are limited by the triceps. That is, when the movement approaches failure, it is the triceps muscle itself that is approaching failure. So skull crushers,
Right.
extensions, so on and so forth. And once you have a really good exercise, the next big rock is the loading range. So how much weight are you going to use? And anything between sets of 5, sets of 30 seems to work very well. Much outside of those ranges, there are some downsides. So loading heavier than 5 just lets you accumulate such a small volume per set. You have to do a ton of sets. And it's so heavy that it's very fatiguing, especially to joints and connective tissues. Can you imagine if I told you you have to train your triceps, but you could only do 1 repetition maxes to get there? You'd just be like, okay, my elbows hurt. And then they'll
Yeah,
be like, well, you shut up, pussy. So, and then sets of more than 30 can work, but they become the stimulus to fatigue ratio again becomes incrementally less powerful. The first 20 or so repetitions of a set of 40 are so light and so non-disruptive, they're like just a big warm-up, and then the efficiency starts to drop, and they do generate fatigue. So at the end of the day, it's the stimulus to fatigue ratio is not that great. So there's loading. There's relative effort, another very big rock. So failure proximity. It's been shown pretty convincingly that anything much further than 5 reps away from failure probably isn't challenging enough for muscle to grow the most.
right.
But if you're anywhere between 3 or 4 reps from failure and 0, you're in a really good situation. The next big rock after that is volume, or the number of sets. So look at what we have so far. We have exercises executed properly for the target muscle in a
Sure.
loading range that is effective, and the sets are taken close to failure. And now the next question is, how many sets do we do? And something between minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable. So you have to do enough sets to actually cause muscle growth. And it's a bit of an experimentation process for that. And not so many sets that you can't recover to come back next week and do it all over again, right? Because some people are like, I'm going to do 20 sets of triceps, and then next week they're like, oh, I'm weaker. You're like, okay, good job.
Yeah,
You're not exactly going to be able to sum up really good training by getting weaker over time. So, set numbers probably anywhere for most people between 3 and 10 sets per muscle group per session. And then the next big rock on top of that is frequency, anywhere between 2 and 4 stimulations per muscle group per week of 3 to 10 sets each time seems to be pretty good. You want a frequency that allows you to have really good stimulative sessions, but also allows enough time between them that you can recover, and not too much time that you're sort of wasting time. So for example, people will
right.
train their they'll train their biceps once a week. All right, let's say you train your biceps Monday. When are your biceps recovered and ready to go hard again, potentially, and have another great workout? They're like, Wednesday. I'm like, uh-huh. And when do you actually do them again? They're like, next Monday. I'm like, okay. Why are
Yeah,
you waiting that long? They'd be
Sure.
like, I don't know. Well, you're a fucking idiot. You just never thought it through. Like, oh yeah, okay. So, when your muscle's ready to go again and it's recovered, it's not sore, and its performance is back to baseline or higher, train it again. And then different
Right.
muscles can recover for different rates, but anywhere between 2 and 4 times a week is a good start for most people. And those are, I think, the big fundamental rocks of hypertrophy right there.
I think in regards to training volume and the minimum effective and the maximum recovery volume, um, probably a couple years ago, I used to focus solely on set numbers, and I had to
Mhm.
go from the minimum to the maximum, or otherwise it was a complete failure, a complete disaster, or I didn't reach a maximum. So, in regards to that, how would you begin with somebody new, with a new client, let's say? How can you establish a minimum and a maximum? Do you go with the meta-analytic recommendations of, let's say, 10 to 20 sets, or with the, I think it was the James Krieger method regression of
Yeah.
6 8 sets? Do you start off with those, or do you have another way of doing that?
6 to 8 sets from James Krieger is an estimate of maximum adaptive volume. That's
Sure.
actually the sweet spot. Now, you don't exactly want to start there because it could be like a lot, especially for beginners, right? So what I like to do is I like to start at the meta-analytic minimum effective estimate, which is
So,
probably like 2 or 3 sets per session.
right.
Like, and a lot of studies do 2 or 3 sets and people see quite robust growth. 1 or 2 sets per session can work for several weeks, but after that, it's just not enough to get you anywhere near your best results. What I do is I start at like 2 or 3, and then I see how the individual is recovering and how they're progressing. If they're
Correct.
progressing very well and they're recovering really, really like way on time, and the magnitude of disruption and effort during the session doesn't seem very great, then you can increase the number of sets a little bit and probably see better results. So, for example, someone, let's say, does 2 or 3 sets per session for chest, and you train chest twice a week, Monday, Thursday. You ask them every time on Tuesday or Wednesday how their chest feels. After the first couple of weeks, they're like, oh yeah, Tuesday, my chest is sore. After a few weeks, you say, how does your chest feel after 3 sets on Monday? And they're like, it didn't get sore at all. Okay, well, during Monday when you're training your chest, did it get a pump? Did it feel tired? Did it feel disrupted? And they're like, no. And honestly, it felt like just like a warm up. And then I left. Well, Daniel, I'd really like to believe that the best kind of training occurs that is so easy that it feels like a warm up, but I'm disinclined to believe that life makes things that easy. Right? So it is
I would
unlikely
agree.
that right. It is unlikely that without hardly trying, you're getting your best gains.
Right.
And if you're not getting really good pumps, if you're not getting a ton of tension perception or fatigue in the muscle, it's not really clear that what it is. What is it that you're stimulating at all, right? So, and after a while, you may realize that training so little resulted in not many gains, and you don't want to have to find that out after a few months. So what you do is you slowly increase the volume to keep the sessions feeling stimulative, a little bit of soreness, a perception of fatigue towards the end, a drop off in performance towards the end. At the end of most chest workouts, you should be, someone should be like, hey, how's your chest feel? And you're like, dude, my chest is like cooked. It's pretty fucked up. Like, because if
Right.
you can say like I feels 100% fine, it's unlikely you stimulated a whole lot because there's no evidence of your stimulus whatsoever. You didn't get fatigued at all. So then once you raise your volume a little bit, then sometimes you raise it a little more and raise it a little more. And then every now and again you deload because you get too tired. And you look back at that mesocycle and you sort of have an average training volume, started a little lower, ended a little higher. And then the next time you can start a little closer to that beginning and see how your results are, see how your stimulus is, see how your fatigue is. And if you're getting great workouts, don't change the volume, just keep going. But if you're noticing like, yeah, like I used to do 4 sets of triceps and that really got me a big pump and it got me really tired and really sore. Now it doesn't really do much. You probably benefit from 5 or 6. And then you do 5 or 6 for a few weeks. You accumulate enough fatigue to where you get tired, you deload, and then you start maybe at 4 again because your body's not used to it after a deload week. And then maybe you float up to 5 or 6 again and stay there, or you go up to 7. So that's how I would program volume. The purpose of training is not to get to your MRV. The purpose of training is to have really good training. Every single session should be really good and stimulative. And at some point, stimulative sessions will result in you getting MRV, because fatigue accumulates over the course of a mesocycle.
Sure.
Now, if you get really good stimulus from 4 sets, it might take you 8 weeks to get to a deload. If you get a great stimulus only from 10 sets, it might take you 4 weeks to get to a deload. Either way, just make sure you can look at every session that you did over the past mesocycle and be like, I felt like that was really adequately stimulative. Don't do one of the following 2 things. Don't leave a quad workout being like, that was easy as shit. That didn't do anything. Why are you leaving? And then 2, don't think to yourself, and I've done this numerous times, you do like of 1 set, like you do 4 sets of leg press and then 2 sets of squats. And after the second set of squats, you're like, I can barely feel my legs. I'm going to be sore for like 9 days. And your training partner is like, another set. And you're like, yeah. What is the point of that? At that point, you're incurring so much damage that you're
Totally.
probably just doing more damage than you are hypertrophy. And then you should probably have left a little bit sooner. So there's a bit of an art and a science to knowing when to keep going and knowing when to shut shit down.
Yeah, I think in regards to that last part about damage, could you say that's one of the reasons we intentionally started the MEV, of the minimum effective volume,
Yeah,
to let the repeated bout effect take place, and then we can begin to build up in regards to the volume increases.
100%. That's one of the reasons that myself and James Hoffman started to theorize about these concepts early, is because we would see programs that were like 3x10 for 3 weeks and then a deload, right?
Right,
The
right.
first week, people would get unbelievably sore. The second week, they'd get like just perfect, a little bit of soreness, heals on time, awesome. The last week, they wouldn't get sore at all. And it was just not a very stimulative week. So we were like, why not do like 2, 3, and 4 sets instead of 3, 3, 3? The average volume is identical, but the first week's perfect, the second week's perfect, the third week's perfect, and then you deload. So your body gets used to doing more volume and can tolerate more volume. And if you smash it with too much volume up front, it gets, and this has been vetted in the literature, it gets so damaged that it can't even grow optimally. Why the fuck would you do that? There's people do that all the time, and it's just a real good stand-in for just telling people you're dumb. Like, oh man, first week my legs are fucked up, and I'm like, why are your legs fucked up in the first week? Was my body's not used to it? Then why don't you do a little less to let your body ease into it? Like, nah. Like, what do you mean, nah? You're literally missing out on muscle growth. And then people will do their last week before deload, and I'll be like, how was your last week? And they're like, it wasn't that tough. I'm like, why wasn't it tough? You're going to deload next week. You might as well put the fine point on it. Like, you might as well make it real tough because you don't have to recover. And overreaching has been vetted in the literature for hypertrophy. Like, it's been shown in several studies that if you do a little bit more than you can recover from, you actually grow later into that next week. Why not do that? And people are like, well, I don't know. A lot of people, I think, just play the needlessly conservative card, where they're like, I just do 5 sets every time. And we're like, why don't you start with 4 and end with 6? Like, well, 5 every time. Like, okay, so it is.
Yeah, I think you can end up at both sides of the spectrum. In one hand, be really conservative that no, I'll stay at 5 sets, or otherwise we can have the old school bodybuilding mentality of all sets to failure, all the sets in the world, and then it's just more damage and damage. And well, now that we understand that muscle damage is not a component of hypertrophy, it's different than muscle protein synthesis in regards to damage, and then
Sure.
hypertrophy. I think that's one of the hardest parts to do actually in the gym, to let loose when you have to let loose and to hold back when you have to. So
Yeah.
in regards to recovery, you were talking about earlier. What are your proxies for recovery? You mentioned soreness. You mentioned the pumps, the perception of fatigue. That's what you take into consideration for when to increase volume or to maintain volume.
So in order to increase or maintain volume, you have to take in 2 things, at least stimulus and recovery.
Right.
So you have to ask like 2 separate questions of, are my workouts sufficiently stimulative? And the next question of, are they so stimulative that they're difficult to recover from? So on the stimulus side, you can look at, am I perceiving a high degree of tension to the target muscle? Am I feeling a disruption to the muscle's ability to perform? For example, if you can think that you're not activating your quads properly in the leg press, but if you have trouble walking down the stairs afterwards, you're definitely activating your quads because your quads are not like they've experienced a disruption in their ability to function. It's clearly a sign that they were stimulated. In addition to local fatigue, so your muscles, if they are properly stimulated, will become locally fatigued. If your triceps are just as strong at the beginning of their workout as they are at the end, I don't know what the hell it is you're doing when you're working out, but it sure as hell wasn't
Right.
using your triceps, right? Just like an army, if you army went through a big battle, they're going to feel it. They're not going to be like, that was fine. You're like, hey, dude, you
Yeah.
guys were in a battle. Right? So that is what I would use for proxies of, pump. Like if you got a robust pump, it's probably a good sign that you are stimulated. If you have no pump to speak of, maybe you're stimulated through very low repetitions, but again, not so likely. And if you did stimulate through low repetitions and you didn't get a pump, at the very least, you should have the disruptive effect. So, for example, if you did hamstrings for a stiff-legged deadlifts for sets of 6, then maybe you didn't get a pump, but someone's like, do you feel your hamstrings? You're like, yeah, my hamstrings are fucked up. Like, they're weird to move, and there's a little bit of instant soreness even. Like, such heavy loading has to disrupt something, right? So then we know we got a stimulus of some sort. This is all scaled. Like, you can have a little bit of disruption, moderate, and high disruption. And then recovery is measured in two factors primarily. One is soreness. Okay, if you are training you train Monday and now you're training Thursday. You train chest on Monday. If your chest is still sore on Thursday, you're not recovered. It doesn't matter what you tell anyone. Okay, there's physical symptoms of damage. I personally wouldn't train very hard chronically through damage like that. So if you're sore Thursday still and you trained Monday, I think it's fine to train. Just warm up carefully, be conservative, and train. But if you're sore every Thursday after every Monday, you're doing too much. Okay, like it's not rocket science. And then the other component of recovery is performance. And this one's really, really important. First of all, if you can perform at a higher level than before, that is almost direct evidence of adaptation. But secondly, if you can't perform at a higher and higher level over time, you can't guarantee an overload. Imagine a situation in which you bench pressed 100 kilos for, do you guys do kilos or pounds over there? Kilos?
We do kilos, yeah. We would do both, but mostly kilos.
So 100 kilos for sets of 10. And like that was a great chest workout. And then imagine that you under recover so much that over the course of the next 4 weeks, you're down to benching 90 kilos for sets of 10. Does someone sees you do that workout and they're like, wow, 90 kilos for sets of 10 is really good. Like, yeah. Did you get a good workout? Like, yeah. Like, didn't I see you bench 100 kilos for sets of 10 like a month ago?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like, so that grew your chest. Like, and you're sure 90 is also growing your chest? It's like, man, I guess maybe.
I hope so.
I hope so, right? It's like taking an English class. If you're Spanish and you want to take an English class, and you take a couple months of English and you get to talking about street names and introducing yourself to people and telling people, oh, my bicycle is broken, can you fix it? Things like that. And then the next week you like read a children's book in English and it's like cat, dog, house. And you're like, I don't feel like I'm learning a lot of English. I think I know all these things already.
Sure.
So, but if your mind is, let's say you've been studying English for 16 hours straight and you're so tired that all you can do is read the children's book and you're like, oh, house. Yeah, okay, I knew that. House, casa. Yeah, okay. I think you're so tired. You're not learning any more English. You're just making yourself worse at English. You just go to sleep and then you start reading English after. So same idea with training. If you're recovered, so basically, how do you know it's time to train again and how do you know you can have a good workout? If your pecs are no longer sore, sweet. And if you are stronger than ever, or at least as strong as you were, compared to last week and compared to, a couple days before, you're fucking golden. But if one of those two things isn't there, it's difficult for me to say that you're going to have the highest possible benefit from your workout that you can.
Right. I was thinking like an analogy. Let's say Blitzkrieg, German Blitzkrieg, could be like, let's say the first week of training, you go, you do what you have to do, and then you go home. But then if you stay too long, I think it was the Battle of Stalingrad.
Yeah.
If you stay for so long, all your soldiers begin to perish, all your resources, but you keep pushing. I think that's when it's more, it's key to pay attention to all those
100%.
proxies for recovery that you were talking about. Soreness, mostly performance. And that's when you can retreat. Let's say take a deload week, and then begin again with another Blitzkrieg. Could you say that's a great analogy?
That's a very good analogy. And I think just the same way that The big problem with Stalingrad was Hitler's ego couldn't let it
Oh,
go.
sure,
The big
sure.
problem in training is a lot of people are like, I need to do more. And it's like, what do you mean by need? You mean psychological need? Like you have psychological pain, which is why you're in the gym training. I don't know if you're familiar with this word catharsis.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
like a liberation of the soul through incredible struggling. And I think a lot of people in the gym for cathartic reasons. They want to let something go, which is cool. Like that's why we're all in the gym. But the love of God, don't lose your mind while you're at it. Like, yeah, it's good for your soul to do another set of cable flies to failure. But remember that you're also there ostensibly to grow muscle and not just liberate your soul. Like, so, when your chest is already feeling super fucked up, go home, eat food, relax, go to sleep, come back a couple days later, and then repeat the catharsis, right? I think some
Right.
people literally, yeah, I am Flex said therapy. Like, people are in the gym for therapy, which is cool. But don't let the therapy fuck you over for your actual results. You know what I mean? Like, number
Right.
one reason you're in the gym is to get jacked. And if you're not in the gym to get jacked or strong, um, why the fuck are you in the gym? There's many other ways to do therapy. Draw a fucking picture. I used to, when I was a kid, I was like 16, I was full of anger. I would listen to Rage Against the Machine and
Oh man.
I would draw Dragon Ball Z drawings of people blowing up planets and fighting. And
Awesome
I
stuff.
thought that was very nice. I felt very good doing that. Now, I also trained in the gym, of course, but that was very cathartic to do. That doesn't cause any fatigue. So just sort of know why you're in the gym. Let's try apply a little bit of reasoning to it, because at the end of the day, things that are to which logic and reason are applied turn out really good. You don't build a rocket off of catharsis and fucking therapy. It's like, why are there 5 engines on that rocket? It's not even like balanced. You're like, I had to put a 5th engine on. My soul told me. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, physics says 4 engines is good because they're symmetrical. You're like, oh, damn it. Like, if you want to build a rocket to go to space, you use logic. You want to build your muscles as big as possible, use some fucking logic.
Right, right. I gotta be honest, that kind of hit home. the catharsis,
Oh
the
shit! Why
catharsis bit.
you building a rocket?
I waited to be the rocket man. I'm not that smart.
Neither have I.
I was trying to build good pecs. That's what I'm trying to do.
More
Yeah.
important than a rocket.
What can I say? Yeah, I mean the catharsis part. I think you can use it. I think you can use it, but you have to be diligent and you have to be smart about it. I think it can be a good thing. It can be a good thing for most people, but yeah, I completely agree that it can completely turn over. And then you're instead of drawing, I used to draw also Goku all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I used to love that, and also Rage Against the Machine, of course.
Sweet.
It can, yeah, because you can put yourself in a thin line, in thin ice in regards to injury, to overreaching, overtraining, and all that.
Totally. And I think it's good to use the catharsis and therapy as an engine to
Right.
motivate yourself. But at the end of the day, you have to have the switch on when to turn the engine off. So, like, if you're on your 5th set of leg presses and a 6th set would be really stupid, just stop at 5, right? Use
Right.
the
Right.
psychology to get you to set 5 and then be like, oh, my quads are pretty cooked. I think I'm good. So then you stop.
I'm ready to go home. I remember. I think also video of you with Charlie training legs, and I recall you were on the leg extension, and then you began yelling in Russian.
Yes, that happened.
That was catharsis, man. I mean, come on.
Totally. And that's cool, except, after I finished that set, it was done, and we went
Right. Right.
home. It's not like I sat there for 5 more sets doing that. I could have, but then
Sure.
I would have been so damaged that it wouldn't have been. The thing is, I think, I've trained for 20 years. I've had many workouts where I should have stopped but didn't. And I paid for it with like soreness that lasts a week, which we have pretty reliable idea that that's so damaging that it's not maximally hypertrophic. What a
Right.
sad state of affairs that you're sore and that soreness is actually hurting you than helping. Soreness is such a beautiful thing. When you're sore, you did a good job. Stop when you're moderately sore so that it's all good. And
Right.
don't go overboard. Like, you ever have DOMS, a delayed onset muscle soreness in your quads, and you have it on the first day and you're like, nice. And it's worse on the second day, you're like, okay. And then it's
Mhm.
worse on the third day, you're like, I'm a fucking idiot. I'm definitely not growing any muscle from this. So
Yeah.
you want it to, reverse after day 1. Yeah.
Just recovering from damage. I think it was Alberto Nunez that once said, "One rep won't make you, but one rep can actually break you." And
Sure.
that kind of hits heavy with all these things put in context.
Well, I think especially that's great advice for Alberto. Yes, I think you might be talking about that rep where you want to get all the way to failure from close to failure.
Right.
And it's especially with something like a compound lift, especially when your technique is starting to break down. Like, look, on a chest press machine, fucking fry out, whatever. But let's say like your last rep of squats was like, ooh, kind of weird. You're like, one more rep. Like that rep can throw off your technique so much that you get hurt. And that's it. Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe rest and do another set.
Very well, Dr. Mike. So, in regards a little bit to progression, there was this. I think it was last month. The series of podcasts you did with Dr. Helms and with Brian Miner also. In regards to all this, I wouldn't say controversy. I wouldn't say anything like that. But I think it's just more of probably a misunderstanding. And first off, the definitions, because in the Brian Miner response, they separated progressive overload from overload. So I would really like to hear from you, what are your definitions of overload and then progressive overload? Is it really a difference, or can we use those terms indistinctly?
Well, they certainly can be used by themselves. I think overload is when your stimulus is within the threshold of what causes an adaptation.
Right.
If it's not sufficiently difficult to cause adaptation, it is not overloading. Progressive overload can be thought of in two ways. Because what gets you results slowly gets harder over time, you have to, at the very least, progress your stimulus to keep up at the bottom end of that. That can be understood as progressive overload. Or there's this margin of things that benefit you, and right in the middle of it, or towards the upper part, there is the thing that benefits you the most, because the entire overload spectrum isn't equal in magnitude. There's parts of it that are more beneficial, more stimulative. So progressive can be thought of in the way of beginning at the bottom end of that spectrum and ending up closer to the top before you deload. So not only can progressive overload be thought of as keeping within that threshold as it changes, or even if it doesn't change, it changes anyway, but even as it changes, you can go from the bottom to the top of it, and that would be progressive overload as well. So progression has to happen at some point. It can happen on shorter time scales. It can happen on longer time scales. I think Brian Miner is a fan of it happening on longer time scales. He's totally fine staying at the bottom end of that spectrum and over the months and years progressing through it. I think something Jared and Feather and I are a fan of is starting at the bottom end of that threshold and over several weeks or months working towards the top and then deloading and repeating. I think it's beneficial to have your training go through that spectrum as well, not just stay in it somewhere. So we do, I think, our idea of what progression should look like maybe bifurcates there to some extent.
I think the main differences are that the progression framework for hypertrophy by Helms or by Brian Miner, it's a little bit more reactive. That you have to, let's say, wait for this performance increases, and then previous sessions, all the volume you've been doing so long, it's actually been an overloading volume. And I think the main difference that we can understand from your, at least what I understand of your thinking, is that you have to be proactive. Would you agree that this is actually the case, or am I missing something here?
No, I think you're right on. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Cool. Your video's a little frozen, but as long as you can hear me and see me, can you see me fine?
Oh, fine and dandy.
Cool. So, there's sort of two problems, I think, with the approach I have that they're advocating. One is there's a fitness fatigue paradigm problem where it's difficult to track true fitness within the weeks of the accumulation phase because you're not sure if your fatigue is going up faster than fitness or the other way around. So there's an opacity there. There is a difficulty in seeing what's going on. So if you're trying to track your performance and use it as a direct indicator of hypertrophy, that entire time,
Right.
you may run into a problem that is not really possible. So that extends into the fact that how do you know you are overloading? If you start at the bottom end of that threshold, and then you actually exit out of that threshold, out the bottom, the threshold leaves you behind, you may continue to have what seems to be productive training for weeks, but it is no longer stimulative enough, but it's also not fatiguing enough, so your performance can continue to be very similar. Or even because fatigue can fall off, your performance can actually peak for a considerable amount of time. For example, if you do a progression scheme whereby you start with doing 6 to 8 sets of a workout, and then you go to 4 sets, and the next week you go to 3 sets, and then 2 sets, and then 1 set, week after week after week, probably the last half of that month is understimulative or not stimulative at all, hypertrophically. Because your fatigue is going to be falling off really fast, you're going to be increasing your performance every single time. And you're going to think, holy shit, like I'm fucking doing it. I'm getting jacked. And you would be incorrect. So that's a problem. In addition to that, it's difficult to judge true reps in reserve. And if you start at 3 reps in reserve, some workouts are actually 3 reps in reserve. Some workouts after that, if you just keep trying 3 RR, might be 5 reps in reserve. You just don't have it that day psychologically. You're made an error. So what we like to do at RP is to start at 3 reps in reserve and to add reps and or load progressively to decrease the RIR to make sure we're never training too easy. And then eventually an RIR 0 shows up and you know you can't have pushed it any further. And in addition to that, we either keep volume the same or slightly increase volume based on autoregulation to make sure that though we started at the bottom end of the volume that was effective, we ended up going through the middle and then towards the top. It gives us an ability to state pretty unequivocally that we started at what was minimally overloading and we went through the entire range of all the way to what was maximally possible. Right. We deload, we repeat, and we never have to play the guessing game of, hey, were there a few weeks there where we were training too easy? The answer is almost certainly no. That's why the proactive motion, I think, makes sense for us.
Yeah, because we can divide ourselves in these 2 camps. I'm proactive in my training, I'm reactive in my training. But I think if we pay close attention to both points of view, I think they have more similarities than they have differences.
Sure.
And it actually becomes a guessing game if you read the framework from Brian Miner or Eric Helms. But maybe it's not really that in a box, you know?
Maybe. I do struggle with I didn't know that they were advocating this before we had the debates, but they actually do advocate to stay at 2 or 3 RIR the entire time.
Right.
I'm not really sure how that works. I don't think that's the best idea that I would use. And I don't understand exactly, maybe they could expound on this, but I don't understand their categorization for when to deload. Ours is very simple. When you fail to match performance 2 times in a row, you deload because your fatigue is excessive. Their cutoff of when to deload is not very clear to me. And if you're never really pushing it close to failure, you can't really ever be sure your performance has actually declined. The cool thing about going 0 RIR and failure at least once in a mesocycle is you're truly trying your absolute most. Now, you may think, and many of us who used to be beginners and intermediates have gone through this, and you think you're pushing it hard. And then you go and increase the proximity to failure. And it turns out you still match your performance, and you're like, oh, I'm so fatigued. There's no way I can keep going another week. But then because you're allowed to increase your proximity to failure, you get another great performance. Like, holy shit. And then you go to failure. Like, wow, that's it. There's no way I can do one more. But you do one more week, and because you're allowed to go to failure again, really try your hardest, you again break your all-time PR for performance. You can keep doing that for weeks. And it turns out that you were always training with 3 or 4 RIR when you thought you were at 1 or 2. It turns out you were missing a lot of your best gains because you were cutting things off too soon. I think if you always target 2 or 3 RIR, it becomes a problem of, first of all, how well are you targeting that? And second of all, are you over or underdoing it? If you target 3 or 4 RIR at the beginning of the meso, and then you progressively add load or reps very slowly, there's not a lot of ambiguity about, am I training hard enough? Because pretty soon either you will continue to get stronger or you will not be able to increase performance, and you'll have a very unequivocal, hard answer to, okay, I did my best. And now you have really good data on what your best is, and you can repeat it in the next mesocycle.
I remember one of the counterpoints to the volume set increases is that all the studies that you mentioned in your progression framework, the set volume in all those studies, it was set from the beginning, let's say 10,
Yeah,
15.
sure.
There were no increases week by week. And I think that's one of the things they mentioned, they covered that, okay, how can you say that a volume is going to be effective if the studies are trying to play? And also, I recall that one of the key aspects of these counterpoints were maybe you can do more volume, but that doesn't equal more hypertrophy. Maybe you're just increasing your work capacity. So what would
Right.
be kind of like an answer to that?
Well, it's two distinct questions, right? So I'll get to the first one.
Sure.
Now, there are very few studies, it turns out, in nutrition that auto-regulate caloric intake. Most studies on obese populations take one calorie level and apply it for 16 weeks or 12 weeks. So there's multiple studies that test a baseline calorie intake of 2,000 calories versus another group does 1,200 versus another group does 600. And the groups lose weight at different rates. If you had a diet you came up with in which you started people at 2,000 calories, third of the way through you put them to 1,200, and the last third you put them to 600, you could be leveled with the critique of, well, now, why are you doing this? And you're like, well, it's progressive calorie reduction. And they can say, like, well, the studies aren't progressive. They're sort of unitary in their calorie application. Yes, but the studies also show that you lose weight a lot faster with 600 calories than with 1,200 than with 2,000. And all of them also show that each one of these loses weight fast at first, but then it bottoms out. So why don't we do this method
Right,
of
right.
adjustment? So just because groups were tested with one variable at a time doesn't mean that you can't take that insight and use it to develop variable progression. So we know that groups that train with an average of 2 to 4 sets don't grow as much muscle as groups that train with 6 to 8 sets and don't grow as much muscle as groups that train with 8 to 12 in a short term. So why can't we take that insight and develop a system whereby we go from group 1 to group 2 to group 3 for all one group? Because theoretically, we develop a work capacity to be able to tolerate that training, and we progress through it, and we know that the results should be pretty predictable. The idea that you cannot theoretically expound on something that makes sense from limited studies, and you shouldn't recommend it because there's no direct research, is an interesting idea that has its merit, but it is a severely limited, because unless you have a study that's conducted directly on yourself, you have a fundamental external validity problem. Any lifter that reads any PubMed research that does not weigh roughly 65 kilos and is not a physical education student that has been lifting for 0 years is technically violating external validity looking at any of these studies. So what you have to do is take the studies, get as much insight from them as you can, and then you can apply them creatively in ways in which they are not conducted with a reasonable expectation. So no, there's no direct studies on, many direct studies on direct ramping of volume, but we know pretty well how volume works at various levels. So we can probably surmise, just like with calories, if you have a person on XYZ calories, eating less calories probably causes more weight loss. If you have a person at XYZ volume, doing more volume probably causes some more muscle growth, as long as the person is not too damaged and relatively adapted to it. So
Right.
the second concern was, what was the second concern,
It was
Daniel?
the work capacity, that if
Oh
you're doing
yeah,
more
sure.
volume, you're not actually just becoming better at doing more volume. That this
Sure.
volume is actually hypertrophic.
Yeah. I haven't seen any studies to show that yet. So in every single study that I've seen, the people that do more volume have hypertrophy evidence behind it. Now, sometimes an intermediate group grows more muscle than the higher volume group, totally. But that's actually quite rare. In most studies on volume and hypertrophy, a lot of volume is the most in a short term to cause hypertrophy.
Right.
So is it possible to train so much that you're now doing work capacity training and you're getting work capacity better, fiber type conversions better, but you're getting incrementally less volume out of each workout? Or sorry, incrementally less hypertrophic stimulus? Absolutely. Absolutely. Very difficult to do that in one mesocycle because cumulative fatigue will almost certainly make you weaker before that ever happens. Over time, driving up the volume really high and eschewing the quality, just trying to find ways to do more volume without paying attention to the quality of a hypertrophic stimulus is absolutely not a great idea. Now, of course, we advise for resensitization periods. We advise coming back down to lower and lower volumes. I think that critique would be apt if we went from 10 to 20 sets and then didn't come back to 10, but we went to like 18 to 24 and then 23 to 30 and then so on and so forth. We don't advocate for that whatsoever. So can you bastardize a hypertrophy training program by just trying to make it do more volume for work capacity's sake? You can. Yeah. Is that something that we advocate, and does our system result in that? No, I don't think so. And through a long range of volumes, more volume causes more growth. So, for example, if someone's doing 3 sets per session, is it likely that as they float up to 6 or 8 sets per session, that they're going to only increase the work capacity and not the hypertrophy? No, that's incredibly unlikely, because most people get more hypertrophy out of 6 to 8. And then more people get more hypertrophy out of 8 to 10. In addition to that, there have been a few studies, specifically on hard gainers, where people who have trouble gaining on a moderate volume protocol or a low volume protocol, so sometimes split them into 2 groups and give one group less volume and the other group much more volume. People who have trouble gaining on an X, whatever protocol they're on, almost always, not always, almost always gain more with more volume. So we can actually expect a volume increase from something sane to something sane and more impressive in volume to cause more hypertrophy, not just work capacity. So these concerns of theirs are realistic. They're definitely a possibility, but they're less likely than more likely. More likely, if you increase your volume of training, you will get more hypertrophy. If you continue to strive for higher and higher volumes, ignoring everything else, you will eventually absolutely do just really, really high volume of training without a lot of hypertrophy to show for it. But that is not the most likely scenario.
So, yeah, because even that's the bastardized idea that many people can understand about the things you put out, that you have to do progressively more volume or else it's just adding. And actually, I think it just came out yesterday, a video on the RP YouTube site about quality over quantity.
Sure.
And I think that all the pieces kind of fit together because, okay, you're advocating for an increase in set volume, but not
necessary.
If necessary and not at any cost.
100%. 100%. I think there's been a less than charitable attempt to understand our positions from many sources. I think it's very easy to lampoon a position and say, oh yeah, those MRV guys, they just say do more volume. Like, well, the thing is, I don't just say do more volume. There's quite a nuanced position. And as a matter of fact, if you look at our stuff on MEV, you could easily caricature us to saying just do less volume.
Right.
We're as against doing excessive volumes as we are doing too few sets. So a lot of times people are so interested in actually analyzing the way we train, and they're interested in critiquing it. Their understanding of what our recommendations are. So that's unfortunate because not a whole lot of learning happens that way. But if it makes people feel nice to try to be smart, that's cool. It's fine with me.
Well, I certainly feel good trying to be smart. I can't lie about that. So, Dr. Mike, last couple of minutes. I know it's a lot to ask from you, but could you give us some key practical takeaways for the people that are listening?
Yeah, sure. It's not a lot at all. So number one is make sure the exercises you're using are effectively stimulating the muscle without a huge fatigue cost. Okay, like if chest flies hurt your shoulders and you don't really feel a pump in your chest, stop fucking doing them.
Right.
Pick exercises that work really well to take the muscle through a full range of motion, that have a lot of perception of tension in the target muscle, like holy shit, my pecs, that sequester a lot of metabolites, that give you a good pump, and don't require a ton of sets to get all that stuff. Once you have that, slowly seek to put a little bit more weight on the exercise week to week to week, potentially a few more reps here and there.
Right.
Start at something like 3 reps in reserve, and over 1 to 2 months, you're going to end up at 0 reps in reserve and inability to perform at a high level anymore, and then you deload. And during that entire time, that accumulation phase, if you ever feel like you're recovering way, way easy, or if the stimulus just isn't that powerful, add a set or two to your protocol and see how it feels. And then at that point, through auto-regulation of volume, on average, what that's going to result in is a little bit of a lower volume at the beginning and a little bit of a higher volume at the end. And sometimes the most common thing it results in, actually, especially for more advanced people, is you get a volume rise at the beginning, and in the middle, once the volume is sufficient, just the relative effort increases and the weight increases and rep increases actually mean you don't have to rise your volume anymore. So, for example, I start out with like 4 or 5 sets for quads per workout at the beginning, and after about 2 weeks, I get to like 6 or 7 sets, and the next 2 or 3 weeks, I stay at 6 or 7 because it checks all the boxes. I don't have to go up in volume. Just going up by 5 pounds or adding a rep here and there, it keeps me in that perfect golden zone of like super fucking stimulated, but just barely able to recover. I just don't. So don't think you have to add sets in a feed forward fashion. Like, oh, time to add sets. Like, okay, are you getting great workouts and are you really fatigued? Like, yeah, barely recover. Why the fuck are you adding sets?
Yeah, right.
And so don't do that. Only add sets if you need to. That's it. And then, over time, keep your technique really good, deload, and that process will result in you lifting more and more and more weight over time. Not more and more sets. It can, but ideally, the sets just cycle from lower to higher, lower to higher, lower to higher, as your body needs them to, and you get stronger over time, and then you get bigger. And that's the fundamental premise of successful training. And every now and again, the exercises get a little stale, and you find some new exercises to repeat that process with for multiple mesocycles.
Which is the meaning of life by itself.
You don't need anything more from life. That's, just hypertrophy.
I can definitely agree on that one. So, Dr. Mike, it's been a huge honor and a huge pleasure chatting with you. I'm really thankful for your time. I hope the people that could listen had something to learn and take home from all this. So I hope we can do this again some other time.
I would love that.
I wish you the best of luck. Are you gonna compete sooner?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I got to get really lean and play with my body water, and if that is successful, then maybe I'll compete. Yeah.
But you're looking insane, man.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I hope to look a little bit more insane over the next couple of weeks.
I'm sure you will. So
I'm running out of body fat, so I don't know where's it all going to come from. Who knows? We'll see.
From negative numbers, you're minus.
That's right, Ronnie Coleman style.
Ronnie Coleman style. Yeah, he had like 0 point something. I think he said in the Joe Rogan podcast something like that.
Yeah, -3%. You're like, huh.
How's that even possible?
I can almost certainly tell you how he got that number. He probably got some kind of body composition analysis that malfunctioned because he's such a freak.
Right.
It's not designed. He's not in the normative population pool. He's like 4 standard deviations outside of that pool. So that's how that happened. And then he just sort of took it for granted, or maybe he was joking. Who knows? You never can tell.
Yeah, you can never tell. He's serious of joking. But anyway, I don't want to take any more of your time.
No worries.
I really hope you have a good day, Dr. Mike, and thanks again. I'm really thankful. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you so much. Take care.
See you, Dr. Mike.
Bye-bye.